Hello, childrens. Old man shouting at clouds again. This one's gonna be fun. You guys have been asking me a ton of questions about the upcoming political election, which I think is more good than bad. Uh, you are paying attention to these issues. You seem to understand that it's important. I think that's probably a good thing to develop at a young age. You're asking me too often who I'm going to vote for, and I've said it on other videos. I'll reiterate it here. I'm not going to tell you who I'm voting for. But the more I've thought about it, the more I think maybe it's important to address it. And it's really hard when we do this in a family setting because there's a lot of like interruptions. So somebody will ask me a question, then someone else will ask me another question, someone else will interrupt that to ask me a third question. So it's really hard to make any progress and give you good answers on these. So I thought this format would actually be better for that. And kind of the first thing I'm going to address is you guys ask me a lot of questions like, what's Trump going to do? What's Harris going to do? Is Trump better than Harris? Is Harris better than Trump? What's the right answer to this issue? And it's like, I can't answer those questions in one sentence, which is about all the time you give me. So this video is going to serve some of that purpose. And more importantly than that, what I'm hoping to outline in this video is kind of a process for evaluating these things yourselves, okay? I don't want to be in the position of always giving you the answers to the test here, especially because I'm not confident I know the answers to these questions with certainty, okay? I have opinions on these things, but I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert on economics. I'm not an expert on government policy. I'm not an expert on infrastructure. I'm not an expert on tax codes and whether it's better to have higher taxes and better government programs or lower taxes and less government programs. I'm not an expert on those things, okay? I have a full-time job and I'm a parent, and that leaves me with very little time outside of those things to investigate these issues. So I'm doing the best I can, but by no means should you take anything I say as gospel here, okay? I could be wrong about many of these things. Now, I don't think I'm totally wrong about it, but, others may feel differently. So, anyway, enough of the enough of the caveating. I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to tell you how I would recommend that you evaluate these issues yourselves. Because, spoiler alert, the way a lot of people are evaluating these issues today, I don't think is particularly productive. I don't think it's going to get them good outcomes. A lot of people are doing a lot of internet research and going to a lot of clickbaity articles and videos. There's a lot of misinformation out there. I think you have to be more diligent than ever about checking your sources. So, what's a good approach to doing that? Well, the best I've come up with so far is I'm just going to the candidates' websites and I'm looking at what they say they're going to do. Now, could they be lying? Yeah, they're politicians, so pretty good chance of that. Or let's say we give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they're not lying. Maybe they fully intend to do all of these things that are on their website. Okay, well, the president doesn't really have complete authority to do whatever they want, right? We have a system of checks and balances, right? Congress can get in the way or help. The judicial system can get in the way or help. So it's not entirely up to the president whether or not their agenda goes through, even if they're elected. So that's important to remember as well. But these are the things they're telling us they'd like to do. It's kind of the best we have to go on. So this video, I'm going to start with the Harris platform. In a different video, I will go through Trump's website. But basically, if you go on the Harris Walz website, they outline a list of issues they plan to address. And to me, the best thing we can do to educate ourselves as voters is go point by point, read what they have to say, and either agree with it or disagree with it. And then move on to the next candidate, do the same thing, put a list of pros and cons together, and then you vote for the candidate that most closely represents what you believe. So, diving into it, what are they talking about? Well, The first thing that I saw listed was they want to cut taxes for middle class families. Okay, I think that's probably something a lot of people at first blush could get behind. But, with policies like this, the devil's usually in the details. So let's dive into it a little bit deeper. How? Like, what are they specifically saying they're going to do? Well, I saw a $6,000 tax cut for families with newborns listed. And then they move on to say they're not going to increase taxes on people making $400,000 a year or less. Now, this is an important one to pay attention to because a lot of the time, what Americans typically associate Democrats with higher taxes, and they typically associate Republicans with lower taxes. This generally does seem to play out, but higher taxes is a really broad term, right? So what the Harris-Walz administration is claiming is they're not going to raise taxes on basically anybody who's middle class or lower, like even upper middle class or lower. If you're making $400K a year, depending on where you live, you're doing pretty well. So, and it's also worth noting that that's like the overwhelming majority of wage earners. So there aren't that many people making more than $400K a year. So basically their claim is if there's going to be a tax increase, it's going to go to the wealthiest people. Okay. You will hear people push back on that. But to me, if you need to increase taxes to support government spending, where else are you going to do it? You're going to increase taxes on the middle class who's already struggling in inflation. You're going to increase taxes on poor people who already can't pay them. The wealthiest are really your only realistic and viable options. So, okay, if you're going to say that a tax increase is required, that's probably the best place for it. They also go on to say billionaire minimum tax. They don't go into any details about what that means. It would be important to find out more information on that. And they plan to 4x the tax on stock buybacks and institute a 28% tax on long-term capital gains for those who earn $1 million a year or more. Now, it didn't say, and maybe this is in a larger document, it didn't say whether or not the earnings, it didn't specifically say that these are $1 million a year in capital gains earnings. It just said $1 million a year in earnings. So I think it's fair to assume that's what they're talking about, but it would be worth spelling that out. In either case, okay, so what stock buybacks? I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on that right now in this video, or it'll be 4 hours long. But companies will buy back their stock to increase the price of their stock. And that's pretty much what that does. It's something that's often abused by companies. And it's, in my mind, I'm okay with putting some hurdles in place so that companies don't abuse that. I don't know if 4 times the tax rate is the right answer, but I'm okay with them doing something to address that. 28% tax on long-term capital gains for those earning $1 million a year or more. That one's a little tougher for me, but I think the key here is $1 million a year or more in those earnings. If you're making that kind of money, you're doing pretty darn well. So again, if you had to raise taxes on somebody, people who are crushing it to that extent, okay, it's hard for me to get too worked up about that. Not really going to impact middle class people, not really going to impact poor people. It's mostly going to impact really, really wealthy people. So I do get a little ambivalent about taxing people on money they've already paid taxes on. So depending on how they received these investments that are producing capital gains, they may have already paid taxes on the money they invested into that to get those capital gains. Again, this could get super complicated if I explained all of this, but that's the one area where I kind of understand people who wouldn't like that idea. I get what you're saying. They've already paid taxes on that money. You're kind of double dipping. You're not wrong if you make that argument, but to me, it's kind of hard to get super worked up about it because again, we're talking about people who are absolutely smashing it financially. In my mind, it's not about punishing them for success. It's about saying we need to collect more in tax revenue, and there's really not a better place to collect it from, right? Again, are you going to tax middle class people more who are already struggling? Like, you've won, you're on the top of the mountain. We're just saying, help us out here. So I guess on that point, the cut taxes for middle class families thing, I would say I more agree than disagree, but details matter. So like, I could change my mind on this if this is one of those devils in the details situations, and there's some like hidden language in it that makes it not make so much sense anymore. But I'm gonna give it a better grade than average. I'd say I'll give it like a borderline A to B grade. I think it's solid. Could be better. Could be worse. Next thing they talk about: make rent more affordable and home ownership more attainable. Well, okay, at first blush, I think most of us should agree with that at this point. Rent's getting crazy. Home ownership is astronomical. I think something needs to be done about that. The question is what, though? Because in a market economy, you don't want to mess too much with the market with some caveats. Now, this is potentially one of those caveats. Like, what are things that you absolutely have to have where you don't have much negotiating power? You have to have a place to live. You have to have food, water. Food, water, and shelter are like the basic necessities of life, okay? So your ability to negotiate on your own behalf is limited when it's something you absolutely have to have. So I'm okay with the government in some capacity putting their finger on the scales a little bit to keep things affordable, but let's dive into it more. How are they going to do that? They propose to build 3 million new rental units and homes that are affordable. They plan to penalize firms that hoard available homes, and they plan to outlaw price fixing by corporate landlords. And then finally, they mention a $25,000 maximum assistance to first-time home buyers for a down payment. Now, at first blush, all of that might sound pretty good. And I'm not saying I totally disagree with it, but it does get really dicey when you start trying to mess with supply and demand as a government. Plan to build 3 million new rental units and homes. To me, if you can execute on that, yeah, that's a good idea. If you increase the supply of these things, the demand gets addressed, and it can bring prices down, or at least stop them from going up. But the question is, how are you going to build 3 million new homes? Clearly there's already a supply issue in the market. Generally, when that happens, new suppliers will come in to address it because there's money to be made. So the question is, why isn't that already happening? And to just say you're going to build 3 million new homes, you can't just wave a wand and make that happen. So there are some structural issues right now preventing the proliferation of new homes, right? There's not enough people in trades. That's a big one. There's also really not as much incentive for a builder to build lower income homes where they're going to make less money on it. Now, that's something that potentially a government administration could address. Maybe they could create some incentives for people to build lower income houses. Okay, sure. Maybe that's how they plan to do it. But again, that doesn't address the fact that there are already labor shortages that are making building new homes difficult. And I don't see anything in here about how that's going to be addressed. So I've got to put an asterisk next to that one, which is if you can actually execute on building that, great. Then I think it's the right decision. But you're going to have to show your work on that one. Penalize firms that hoard available homes. Sure. Okay. I don't have a problem with that. Outlaw price fixing by corporate landlords. Okay, yeah, that's anti-competitive behavior. I'm good with that. $25,000 assistance for first-time home buyers. This is one of those policies where it's like, man, it sounds good when you first hear it. You're like, yeah, they need help. It's hard to save up the money for a down payment when houses are so expensive. Nod. Yeah, That's the right answer, right? Right? Careful. I don't know, man. When you hand out free cheese like this, it can sometimes have the opposite effect. So, what's the problem right now? Why are prices so high? Well, you have a super hot market for buying or renting homes, right? Because there's not enough supply, that drives the price up. So you already have this like hyperactivity in the market. Now, if you hand a bunch of people 25 grand, is that going to make that problem worse? It could. It certainly could. And then what the solution you created to address this actually ends up making the problem worse. I'm not positive that's what would happen, but that's certainly a logical conclusion to draw, or at least a logical thing to question. So I don't know about that one. Now, overall, it's kind of a mixed bag in this one, right? Like, at least they're trying to address this. It is a legitimate issue. There's some good stuff in here. There's some stuff that I think is kind of questionable, but it's more good than bad, in my opinion. So I think worst case, I'd give it a B. Depending on how they plan to address some of this stuff, I could be convinced that it's closer to an A, but I got to give it a B. There's enough question marks here that I can't say it's like a great, great policy. Moving along, grow small businesses and invest in entrepreneurs. Okay, cool. How? So they say they're going to increase capital for small businesses and bring venture capital to parts of middle America with a particular focus on driving investment in minority-owned businesses. Okay, not surprising to hear that from a Democrat. Expand startup expense tax deduction for new businesses from $5,000 to $50,000. Increase the share of federal contract dollars to small businesses. Okay. So this, I think, is one of the biggest bats that the Democrats give to the Republicans to hit them with. This is like super dangerous waters to wade into, but whatever. They focus so much of their attention on speaking to minority groups and like don't really pay a lot of attention to speaking to white people, or specifically white men. They do talk to women more. Now, if you feel some type of way about that, maybe your argument is, well, yeah, they should. White men don't need help. Minority groups need it far more. Okay, well, I'm not going to argue with you about that. That's how you see it. What I'm saying is the other side doesn't see it that way, and you've just handed them a bat to hit you with because you're doing more of that. And unless you don't think you need white men voting for you to win the election, that might be a debatable policy choice. As far as the startup business tax deduction for new businesses, yeah, okay. That might help. For a lot of people starting a new business, like the cost of entry is a big barrier. If this could help that, then maybe you get more people starting small businesses. I do think it's better to have more small businesses than just these giant conglomerates. That could be an entirely different video about why that helps. But okay, not bad. The question, though, again, when we always talk about these tax credits and tax deductions and lowering people's taxes, that's all fine and good if you're either going to then lower government spending or you're going to increase taxes somewhere else. Because as much as some people like to say taxes are theft, no, they're not. You do get something for your tax money, and some of those programs are incredibly necessary. For example, I like having roads to drive on. I like having police in case somebody breaks into my house. I like firefighters if my house starts on fire. Those things all cost money, okay? It has to come from somewhere. So if you're going to cut if you're going to provide a tax deduction for small businesses, that revenue you used to be collecting has to come from somewhere else, and I don't see that addressed. So I'm going to give this a C just because there's some lack of detail here. I don't think it's the most inclusive. I would have preferred that they say we'll increase capital for small businesses and bring venture capital to parts of middle America with particular focus on providing more benefits for lower income or middle income people writ large rather than just saying anybody other than white men. But hey, whatever. Like, other people are going to see that differently than I do. We can have a intelligent and reasonable disagreement on that and have a productive discussion on it. But I do think it's an area where if I were to guess when I look at Trump's website, the language will be different on how he plans to approach that. So yeah, it's a little too vague for me. I got to give it like a C. All right, next up, take on bad actors and bring down costs. This should be fascinating. All right, so what are we going to do? We're going to crack down on anti-competitive practices, okay? A federal ban on price gouging on food and groceries, all right? And we're going to take on big pharma to lower drug prices by taking on pharmacy middlemen. Okay. Pretty vague. But let's take it point by point. I'm okay with cracking down on anti-competitive practices. I think that's something we certainly need to do more of in America. There's a lot of it. We have antitrust legislation in place, and it doesn't get enforced. We'd probably benefit from it being enforced. Just having more competition in more areas is generally good for the consumer. So, okay, I'm cool with that. Probably like them to show their work a little bit more on that. Like, let's go into detail on what exactly you're going to do. But, okay. Federal ban on price gouging on food and groceries. Now, this one I struggle with a little bit because I've actually seen videos addressing this. I think the Plain Bagel did a really good one, and I'll see if I can link to that one. But he basically broke it down and was like, okay, yes, prices have gone up substantially. We all know this. We're all paying higher rates at the grocery store. It sucks. But are they actually price gouging? That's the question that really matters, is are they really doing that, or have their costs just gone up astronomically and they're passing it along to stay in business? And according to that video, it looked like that was more the case here in the US, that their costs have just gone up and they're passing those costs along. Grocery stores are not historically a high profit margin business. They're surviving on really thin margins, and that appears to still be the case. So it's not like they're just taking advantage of an inflationary environment to get rich. So this one to me feels more like virtue signaling than an actual coherent policy. So I'm not a huge fan of that one. I mean, look, if price gouging is going on, do I want them to take care of it? Yeah, for sure. It's just not clear to me that that's what's happening in the food and grocery industry specifically. In other areas, it very well might be. If it is, I'd be all for them addressing that. Moving on, taking on big pharma to lower drug prices. Sure. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that needs to happen. But here's the deal. This is exactly what I'd expect to see from a Democratic presidential candidate. Look like we're doing something without actually doing what needs to be done. So this may come up again in another point that they make, but basically the problem is the healthcare system and the way it's structured. End of. Okay, you can sit here and take individual problems within the healthcare industry and create some kind of band-aid fix for it. But the reality is the way the system is set up just is not going to work, okay? Again, this is another one of those examples of like food, shelter, water, healthcare. You could throw in that bucket like it's just something people need. And they're not in our system. We try to treat healthcare like other products where it's somewhat market based, and that just, it's not, in my opinion, it's just not going to work. Okay, you're always going to have the problem that it's going to be really, really expensive in America if it's somewhat market based. Because again, let's say I have a heart attack, right? And I'm in the ambulance, or an ambulance shows up at my house and they start throwing me on a gurney and wheeling me out. I can't sit there and say, wait, how much is this ambulance ride going to cost me? And they're like, well, like $5,000. Okay, well, I don't want to do that then. What am I going to just stay and die in my house? Am I going to have my wife drive me to the hospital while I'm having a heart attack? Then what happens when you get there? Are you going to say, wait, doc, before you do this ultrasound or before you start giving me medication to start addressing the heart attack I'm currently having, how much is it going to cost? Ooh, I'm going to need you to take like 25%. No, you don't have time. You're dying. Okay. So this is why I don't think healthcare is something that can be addressed effectively the way we're currently addressing it. Now, are there problems with the other kind of model that's out there, the more like nationalized healthcare system? Absolutely, there are. There are countries. There are countries that aren't doing that at a super high level right now, and you have to wait a long time for care, and maybe the care you get isn't the best. So I'm not saying the other option is perfect, but I think we're just going to continue to have expensive healthcare in this country if we don't address that core issue. This doesn't do that, in my opinion. So I don't know. For this one, I got to give it like best case is like a C. I think I'm probably leaning more like C minus. Cracking down on anti-competitive practices, yes, I would say that is like either a B or an A. I like that idea. But the rest of it here is either like not fleshed out enough, or it seems like we're kind of addressing the wrong issues. All right, next. Strengthen and bring down the cost of healthcare. Okay, yep, not surprised we're seeing that again. I'm skeptical, but let's read on. Okay, so how do we plan to do that? We want to strengthen the Affordable Care Act. Yep, already not a huge fan. Making permanent the Biden-Harris tax credit enhancements that are lowering premiums by an average of $800 a year. Bringing down the cost of life-saving prescription drugs by extending caps on certain drugs. Allowing Medicare to negotiate with Big Pharma. Okay, that I don't hate. Removing medical debt from credit reports. Cancel $7 billion in medical debt for 3 million Americans. Combat maternal mortality. No detail given there. Extend Medicaid postpartum coverage from 2 to 12 months. Okay. Yeah, this is kind of what I expected to see. So again, basically we're like continuing the Obama, Biden, Clinton, Harris path of like, we're going to stack stuff on top of our insane healthcare apparatus to try to treat some of the symptoms of it just not making sense, but we're not actually going to really address the real issue. So, I mean, I could go into detail about why I think every single one of these points. The only one I don't hate is allow Medicare to negotiate with Big Pharma. Okay, yeah, I think that would help. Removing medical debt from credit reports. Okay, again, it might help a bit. But to me, a lot of this stuff, it's like, could it help somewhat? Sure, but it's like throwing a Dixie cup of water on a forest fire. It's not the answer we need. So it's status quo. I guess it somewhat addresses some things. So C. Yeah, that's where I'm at on that one. All right, move along. Protect and strengthen Social Security and Medicare. Strengthen these programs basically by increasing taxes on millionaires and billionaires, essentially, is what I'm getting here. Okay. Yeah. I think that's the best available approach. Again, it's going to sound punitive, like we're punishing people for their success. Okay. I mean, if that's your interpretation of it, I can't help you. But again, the question at the end of the day to me is, if you agree that this program should be in place, then how else do you fund it? Are you going to tax middle class people more? Are you going to tax poor people more? Like, they can't take that as it is. So that's not really a great option. I mean, I guess you could tax the middle class more and maybe they could absorb it, but chances are good what would happen is the money they might have been putting back into the economy is instead going to go to that tax and come out of the economy. So I don't know that that's the answer you want. Rich people can still spend money and absorb a little bit more in taxes. I just think it's the only option you have available to you if you want to keep these programs in place. Now, if you're a conservative, like an ultra conservative, maybe you think Social Security should be done away with. Maybe you think Medicare should be done away with. Okay. That's certainly an opinion you can have. I disagree. I mean, I think it's already hard enough for people to retire. Healthcare is already bad enough. I'm not sure we want to make those problems worse, but if that's your opinion, I guess you can vote accordingly. But yeah, so okay, I look at this one and I'm like, I don't know what other option there is. If you want to keep these programs in place, they need to be funded. Social Security is already looking at a financial shortfall, so you have to increase revenue somehow to support it. Hey, yeah, I'm on board for that. I don't think that's a bad idea at all. I can't poke any holes in that one, and I don't have a better idea. So fair enough. All right, next one. Support American innovation and workers. Okay, how are we going to do that? Okay, we're talking about the infrastructure program that's already in place. Infrastructure tends to be one of the few things a government can spend money on that actually does have a positive ROI. So I'm mostly on board with that. I think where you get into trouble with that stuff is there can be some pork barrel spending, which means like earmarking certain buckets of money for things that like maybe it's like going to their cousin's business or something like that. So there are opportunities for corruption in that. Definitely something to be taken seriously, but I more agree with this idea than disagree with it. The details absolutely matter again, so it's certainly something that could go awry if it wasn't done correctly, but I agree with the overall premise. And then what else? Plan to build on this by continuing to support American leadership in semiconductors. Okay. Nod. Good idea. Clean energy. I like clean energy. AI, a little scary, but cat's probably out of the bag on that one. And cutting edge industries of the future. Plan to fight for unions, not tolerate unfair trade practices from China and others, raise the minimum wage, and sub-minimum wages for tipped employees or people with disabilities, paid family and medical leave, eliminate taxes on tips. None of that should be terribly shocking if you've been paying attention to Democrats, but in my opinion, it's a mixed bag. So infrastructure spending, yep, good with that. We need it desperately. So I'm cool with that. Do I think we need to expand on semiconductor manufacturing here in the U.S.? Absolutely. Clean energy, yep, good. AI, again, I think, whether you think AI is a blessing or a curse, it's here. It's not going away. So we should get our arms around it. And then cutting edge industries of the future. Yeah, who's going to be against that? Fight for unions. This one will be very divisive. So if you're a conservative, you're probably definitely not in favor of that. If you're more liberal, you're likely to be in favor of it. In my opinion, unions can be dangerous. We've seen it be abused in the past. I don't think that's good. But overall, the basic idea of a union, if done correctly, yeah, I'm in favor of that. I do think labor should have a stronger voice than it has. Like right to work where you can just be canned for no reason. Some of that, there do need to be some protections in place for employees. So I guess I would say I'm somewhat hesitant, but more in favor of that than not in favor of it. Not tolerating unfair trade practices from China and others. Devil's in the details on that one. We definitely need to address it, but how you address it for sure matters. So I would need to see more on that. I can't really speak to that with just what they've said on their website. Raise the minimum wage. Man, this is a tough one. So, yeah, in a lot of places, the minimum wage absolutely needs to go up. The cost of living has gone up dramatically. Someone should be able to survive on a minimum wage, and that's very unrealistic in some places and incredibly difficult in others. I would struggle to think that there's anywhere you could live comfortably on a minimum wage. So I think that it needs to be addressed, but a federal minimum wage, I really, really struggle with that because this country is extremely diverse. So the living conditions in New York City, for example, couldn't be more different than they are in like some rural town in Wisconsin. Those places should not have the same minimum wage. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Somebody could still be borderline starving in New York on $20 an hour and like doing pretty okay in some other places at $20 an hour. So I don't know that that makes sense to me. I do think you need to address the minimum wage. I'm just not sure a federal minimum wage is the answer there. And again, devil's in the details. There are things like will prices go up if you massively increase the minimum wage? Yeah, probably. There could be some inflationary impacts of that, and you need to be cognizant of that. So some of these things are just like standard talking points Democrats are always going to use because they're generally popular with middle America, but the devil is definitely in the details. End sub minimum wages for tipped employees. Yeah, this is another one of those where it's like, okay, but if you do that, you're massively increasing labor costs for a lot of restaurants. Not an insignificant percentage of those might go out of business as a result because they might just be struggling to get by right now. If you increase their labor costs dramatically, they might not be able to sustain that. So, again, need more detail on that. I don't, but I would struggle to think that it's not going to also have some pretty negative consequences if you actually do it. Paid family and medical leave, fine. Eliminate taxes on tips. Again, devil's in the details. So if you're not taxing that, where are you increasing taxes or cutting costs? Also, a lot of tipped employees aren't really paying taxes on them right now. A lot of stuff goes on there. The restaurant industry could be a whole different video, but yeah, suffice it to say that a lot of them are not paying taxes on all of the tips they're bringing in. So yeah, mixed bag again. C plus B minus. To me, there's a lot of kind of virtue signaling here and stuff that just doesn't totally make sense when you shine a light on it. Now, maybe there are some details that are left out of this that if they were provided, it would answer the questions or the concerns. But at that reading of it, it's like okay-ish. All right. Provide a pathway to the middle class through quality, affordable education. Okay. How? So investing in public education. Okay. Student debt relief. Record investments in minority serving institutions. Increasing Pell Grant award by $900 on average. Investing in community college. Investing in apprenticeships and career pathways for non-college graduates. Okay. I actually like this more than I thought I would. I thought this would be kind of along the same lines as healthcare and, negotiating with prescription drug companies and minimum wage increases where it's like, okay, kind of stereotypical Democrat policies. And there's definitely some of that in there. Investing in public education, look, I'm good with that. I think education is something we absolutely need to invest in more. Student debt relief, okay, it is a pretty big drag on the economy. There's probably something that needs to be done there. But people did sign up for these loans, okay? Nobody put a gun to their head. And there's lots of other people with lots of other types of debt that aren't getting relief. I can understand some salty feelings on that. Not to mention, like, the people who already paid for their own school. Like, they busted their... Like, I worked a lot during college, too. Now, granted, I was not paying for the full cost of my own education by any means. I don't want to give that impression, but like imagine people who worked full time through college to put themselves through it. And now the people who didn't work that hard are getting bailed out. Like I can understand people being salty about that. Increasing Pell Grants. Okay, I'd be fine with that. $900 though, to me, just like seems like throwing a Dixie cup of water on a forest fire again. Like the cost of college education is just eye-watering at this point. I don't know that that's the fix, unless you're going to increase that by a significant amount, in which case, where does the money come from? Investing in community colleges, I'm a big fan of that idea. Investing in apprenticeships and career pathways for non-college graduates, big fan of that idea. Okay, so I really like investing in community colleges. I really like investing in apprenticeships and alternative pathways for non-college graduates. Like, so going into the trades, things of that nature, big fan of that. I think Mike Rowe has a really good point on that. Like, that's the way you address the cost of college, is you make it the not the only pathway to get a good career. So I actually like this more than I thought I was going to. So I got to give them credit there. I still think there are some meh ideas in it, but I'm going to give it a solid B. I could be convinced to move that to a B plus or an A minus if I had learned more about their student debt relief ideas. Again, record investments in minority serving institutions. I don't think that's a bad idea, but I this is where Democrats are going to lose more center right people. Is you're only focusing, or it can give the impression that they're only focusing on minority groups and ignoring a large swath of the population. So I'm not sure how wise of a strategy that is. All right, next up, invest in affordable childcare and long-term care. Yeah, this is like super vague. This is the most vague thing so far. So there's not much to unpack here. Yeah, okay, if you want to invest in affordable childcare, I think that's something we could all get on board with. That is crazy expensive at this point, and long-term care is insanely expensive too. So I don't disagree that those are things that need to be addressed, but there's literally like no detail here, so I can't say whether I agree or disagree. I just got to give them an incomplete. Next, lower energy costs and tackle the climate crisis. This will be controversial. Protect public lands and public health, increase resilience to climate disasters. There's no detail. Yeah, again, there's no detail here. So, okay, yeah, it's something that we need to address probably, but there's nothing in here that says how it's going to be addressed. So, incomplete again. All right. So, overall, there is some actually good stuff here, I think. Honestly, better than I was fearing. There's for sure some stuff that's like not well fleshed out. There's some stuff that's kind of, you roll your eyes a little bit, especially if you're center right or super right. But it's not, to me, like what I think I've heard a lot of people talking about is the like woke agenda of the Democrats. And I'm seeing some of that, but it nowhere near as much as I thought I would hear based on all the dialogue. And there actually are some some policies that I think are financially reasonable and sound. And so, yeah, I can see there's things for sure in here that a staunch conservative or somebody who's even right of center would take issue with. And some of those are fair, I think. But this is what I think we need to focus on, okay? Go issue by issue, evaluate the issue. Does it make sense? And then we need to hold our political candidates' feet to the fire on these things where they don't flesh out the idea and say, no, that's not good enough. How are you going to do that? Tell me more. Where's the money coming from? How is this being deployed? That's how we should be handling this as a country. And man, you watch the political ads, very little of this is focused on in those ads, okay? So don't make your decision that way. Don't make your decision based on what your Looney Tune friend said at school. Actually look into these issues with a calm frame of mind and evaluate it logically and practically, okay? That's how we should be approaching these issues. We cannot let the political candidates do this all based on fear tactics, because they will if they can. It's easy. It's like the cheap laugh. So we can't allow them to do that. So this is super important. All right. So I've done Harris now, and I will do Trump another time, and we'll do it the exact same way. Okay. We're going to steer out of the emotionality of it, and we're going to talk about the brass tacks. What are the issues? What do they say they're going to do? Do I think it's largely a good idea or a bad idea? So I hope this begins to help. I know this is a super long video for you guys. I know it's probably at a level that's not going to make a ton of sense. But what I hope you take out of it is just how to begin addressing these issues and how to not allow yourself to be manipulated by like the emotional and scare tactics. Okay? So love you very much. Hope it helped. Catch you on the next one.